Hey makers, this is the first of several videos that I'm going to be doing with the second release from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous for 2024. So this is a release of 4 stamp sets. The first one that I'm going to talk about is called Hodgepodge CMS 490. And look at this, it's a huge, beautiful stamp. All one piece, but you could use it as a background. You could use it to cut some of these smaller items out of. All kinds of fun things you could do with this, right? And then there's this one that is Embroidery CMS 486. This one looks like it would be so fun to stamp or emboss and color. And then this one, the French Garden CMS 487. This one is beautiful florals and leaves, a little bit of some text, script, a little label, but just some beautiful florals that I think just go so well with so many of Tim's stamps that we have already. This one comes with its own stamping block. Several of Tim's stamps that have really large images often will come with a stamping block from Tim and Stampers. And so this one comes with it. In the back, it's like that. And so this is just a nice, really big floral. Look at that. It kind of looks engraved. It's called Floristry CMS 485. And it just looks like an engraved image. Such a beautiful bouquet. And then all these wonderful sentiments. Hello, friend. Thanks so much. Best day ever. Miss you. Congrats. Love you. Just because. Best wishes and happy birthday. And so it's a really clear font on there. So these are the stamps that are released as part of this new chapter. Well, it's not really a chapter. The second release for Everyday Stamps for Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. I just wanted to introduce them to you because I'm going to be using them in the next few videos. And so I just wanted to go over them before I get them all inky and all of that. So let's get ready to go and let's start making. I chose the Floristry stamp for this first card. I'm going to be stamping on a piece of distressed black heavy stock, and I'm going to be embossing it with clear fine embossing powder. And so I put my nonstick powder on. I am now stamping it with clear distressed embossing ink, and I'm going to go ahead and put my fine detail embossing powder on there. And then I'm going to heat emboss it, so getting it all melty and shiny. And then I will wipe off that powder, and I'm going to start watercoloring it with Distress watercolor pencils. Now, I didn't go in with the actual pencils. I am actually using my water brush and my palette that is made from the Distress watercolor pencil shavings. And so I'm just going through it and I'm coloring, and I'm going to be honest, it was difficult to see some of the small details, but for this technique, I didn't need a lot of the small details. I needed more of the bigger, bold images from this stamp, so it all worked out all right. But you can see that I'm laying a lot of the pigment from the pencils onto each of these sections here, and it's coloring over the embossed area. So when I was doing this, I was just kind of trying things out just to see how it would work. And I wasn't sure this was going to work out okay. But I figured if worse came to worse, I could do the iron off resist and then the black outline would show through again. But I actually didn't need to do that. You could, but I just used a dry cloth and wiped away the excess with the cloth, and look how quickly it wipes away, and it leaves that raised shiny embossing, and I think it gives it a really cool look. For my card base, I took a piece of black heavy stock and cut it 4 1/4 by 11, scored it at 5 1/2. And I took the front panel and trimmed it down into, as you can see, it's straight for about 3/4 of an inch at the top, and then I cut it into a triangle shape. That's going to fit behind my stamped piece. I'll show you in a minute. And then right here I have a white top scored card base that I have also cut in a triangle shape, and I'll show you what I'm doing with that as well. Now I started fussy cutting out the Floristry stamp, and you can see that I'm cutting off a bunch of the tiny leaves. I really want the main shape, and so I'm editing as I am trimming. And you can see that I'm also putting it on that card base to make sure it's going to cover that triangle flap on the front. And when I'm happy with it, I also need to make sure that it's going to fit all the way across the top of this card where it's straight. It's the entire 4 1/4 across the top of that card. So I need to make sure it's wider at the top and then it goes to that triangle at the bottom. I've got my adhesive on there and it's just Distress Collage Medium. And now I'm working on fitting my fussy cut piece so that it goes centered over that triangle shape on the front that I cut to fit perfectly behind it. I'm just wiping off some excess collage medium here, and I want to make sure that it's really adhered to that front piece. So I'm using my bone folder to make sure that it's all pressed down and that I've got a nice seal on it. And now I need to trim off the excess. So I'm going to go ahead and trim down both sides with my guillotine trimmer. And there I go. And now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to trim just a hair longer than the folded front of the card. Now I was looking at the card and decided I needed some interest on the inside. So I grabbed my Mesh and Linen CMS 221 stamp and I decided to use the mesh stamp for the inside. So on an additional piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 black heavy stock, I used my fossilized amber Distress Oxide to stamp the mesh stamp, and I didn't want it perfect, so I just wanted a little bit interest. Then I embossed it with Distress Embossing Glaze in fossilized amber. Once I had heat embossed the embossing glaze, I then attached that piece to the inside of the card right up against the score line. And so now that kind of gives that a little bit of interest, but I also need a place to write a note to whoever I give this card to. So if you remember earlier, I was outlining that front flap shape onto a white card base that was also scored at the top. And here it is. So I just attached it inside the card and now it's ready for me to write a note to someone and send it to them. Now I need something for my sentiment, so I turned again to my Distress watercolor pencils and a scrap piece of the black heavy stock, and I just colored with Distress watercolor pencil in fossilized amber and made a little matching mat for my sentiment, and I attached the sentiment to that mat, and the sentiment was stamped in fossilized amber and also embossed with Distress Embossing Glaze. There I have a piece of chipboard that I attached behind my sentiment, and I put it on the front of my card. Now, I decided to see if I could do this or not. So this is just a piece of string, and I colored it with my fossilized amber Distress watercolor pencils, and it worked. So I took my string and just tied it around the top of the card quickly to add a little more texture and a little more interest. And there we have it, my finished card. I really love the embossing on this and how it just really stands out. It's so dramatic with the watercolor pencil, vibrant colors on the flowers. And even I love the pairing of that mesh in the background. It gives it just a little bit of texture, but not too much. continues the interest going all the way down the card so that your eye flows all the way down to that sentiment at the bottom, which is also stamped and embossed in distress embossing glaze, so that all ties through and it's just a little bit shiny. Well, thank you so much for watching. As always, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments or on my blog. And I want to wish you all a very creative day.